The way that we're going to do this is I'll have each of the individuals introduce themselves and then talk a little bit about the work that they're doing right now. And then we'll, go into this conversation of working together, where there's overlap, how they're working together, this idea of moving the ball a little bit further down the road and taking advantage of these huge assets that, frankly, a lot of them weren't available when we were first working on this 20 years ago. So it's a tremendous opportunity to hear from them, even maybe touch on some of the legislation that's going on, because we weren't able to hear from the elected officials today. So why don't we start? We had, I know Katal, why don't we start with Kenyatta, has been doing a lot of work on a criminal justice scan and just getting people together with calls and the like. And, Lorenzo and Gabriel, who started Katal, it's pretty fascinating. Lorenzo was doing this work on the community side, the one that was reminding us to have this rooted in community 20 years ago, and was frustrated, frankly, probably, with how much it seemed that the community voice wasn't being heard. And it's just great to see them coming back and being a part of this conversation in such a large way. And Gabriel was formerly with Ethan Nadelman on the Drug Policy Alliance, and we had them here about 6 or 7 years ago trying to push the needle on smart drug policy, and it's just amazing to think where we are as a state. The idea of legalizing marijuana, or even decriminalizing it, we thought we'd be thrown out of the room for just bringing up that subject. So it's amazing, and one of the breakouts later on is going to be talking about how do we have equity with that. Now, how do we talk about the places that are most impacted, that have been most impacted by the criminalization of these things, be the recipients of the reinvestment of the dollars that come back from folks not being in the justice system? So Kenyatta, the floor is yours.
Wicked. Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming you all can hear me because I can hear myself. So my name is Kenyatta Thompson, and I'm the community organizer at the Katal Center for Health, Equity, and Justice here in Connecticut. For those who are not familiar with the Katal, we're a community-based organization that prioritizes the leadership of directly impacted people. And by directly impacted people, we mean people who've been impacted by mass incarceration, mass criminalization, and the war on drugs. So we stand on two pillars, those two pillars being harm reduction, so we meet people where they are without judgment and we don't leave them there, and community organizing, which is you don't do for others what they can do for themselves. So I am quite happy that I'm actually kind of starting this all off in terms of keeping it in the community. So as we entered the last few years in Katal, we actually decided to conduct a criminal justice reform field scan of Connecticut to see where community organizers, activists, reformists, abolitionists, and formerly incarcerated people in the state wanted Connecticut to go. And that even started before I came to Katal. And we conducted a series of interviews, a series of surveys, which many folks in the room have actually taken, so I really appreciate it. And it kind of helped us realize 5 major themes. And I'll share those 5 themes now, if that's all right. Yeah, and I'll talk about how that worked. We found it, in our member meetings, because we're also a member-based organization. So the first of that is that we found there's a need to increase the funding for community organizing for criminal justice reform. We don't do a lot of that in the state of Connecticut, and a lot of our respondents talked heavily about that. The second one was the necessity for the criminal justice reform field to align with other fields. If we don't talk about how criminal justice reform is rooted in the healthcare system, rooted in the housing system, rooted in all these other systems, we're not actually doing the work, because they're all the same system. The third one is the necessity for a shared table on criminal justice reform. And we've actually started to spearhead that based on the respondents that we've heard and based on those responses. I think there's a lot of movement in the state around criminal justice reform, but they've been in very select areas, and most of our respondents found that they wanted a broader table on criminal justice reform, and I'll talk about that very briefly later. The fourth response was a necessity to better integrate directly impacted people into the criminal justice reform field. A lot of times we get from directly impacted people and people who've actually been through the system that they're just there to share their story, but there's more to their story. It's more than just sharing your pain, especially for Black communities. That's all we've been taught to do, share our pain and you can profit off that, but we need to do much better at that. And the last major theme we found, which we have been diving heavily into, is the necessity to give better resources for both current and formerly incarcerated women. Not enough resources exist for women in Connecticut and across the country in respect to criminal justice reform. And so if we leave out the women, we're just leaving out half of the population. That is absolutely unacceptable. So just to kind of wrap all of this up so the rest of the folks can get time, because I don't want to sit here and take all this time, we found that even reflected in the work that we do here in Connecticut, a lot of those themes existed. In our monthly meetings that we have, folks have been spearheading campaigns around the need for housing, and so that's to better integrate the criminal justice reform field with other issue areas, because housing for formerly incarcerated people is just non-existent. We found that folks want to do research on women and the resources that exist for women who are formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated. Like I said before, is an absolute necessity. And just to touch on a little bit with what Andrew said, we also monthly convene a criminal justice reform call where folks can share the issues that they're working on. And we also have our Healthy and Just CT Coalition, which is to talk about the intersections of criminal justice reform and other issue areas. And so, in short, that's what we do at CATAL. It's a grounded, community-based organization where we bring together folks who have been directly impacted and folks who care about criminal justice reform to basically build power.
Thanks, Kenyatta. And, you know, one of the great things, people that know me, I'm kind of a Luddite, so like this is the phone that I have. But one of the great things that has happened since we started these conferences was the rise of the digital age and to share information. So if folks wanted to be able to get on a call with the criminal justice call, I imagine they could just go to the CATAL site.
Absolutely. You can register at catalcenter.org. You can also find our full scan, and our principal investigator and director of research, Jared Williams, is actually in the audience as well. So if any folks want to talk with him about the scan and about the criminal justice reform calls, that's also an option.
Great. And also, just for folks that, you know, everybody's got a smartphone now, if you wanted to take a look, our conference site is, you know, ccsu.edu/IMRP. And also, there was a video of Michelle Alexander that was playing there earlier. You know, we have a lot of videos from the former conferences and the like that are a part of a Vimeo site, Vimeo, and if you just search Vimeo IMRP, you'll see a lot of those old breakout sessions and the like if folks are interested. And one group that I know that is doing a tremendous amount on social media and otherwise is the ACLU and the Smart Justice folks. They bring a crowd, and they also do a tremendous job of sharing the experiences of what's happening at the legislature and otherwise out to the broader community. And maybe Gus, you can talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with the ACLU Smart Justice, the origins of that, probably some of the nationwide campaign, and then maybe some of the legislation. And you know, feel free to, you know, take 5 or so minutes because we have a little bit longer for this panel because the last one was shorter. So.
Sure. My name is Gus Marks Hamilton. All right, there we go. My name is Gus Marks Hamilton. I'm the one of the field organizers with the ACLU Smart Justice Connecticut campaign, along with Anderson Curtis, who you just heard in the back of the room. I know one of the things we've been talking about is how we can work more collaboratively together with CATAL, the NAACP. In my own journey through the correctional system in Connecticut, I'm formerly incarcerated for a number of years. I've been through the system. What has helped me, what has sustained me, what has brought me here today have been the relationships. Being incarcerated, going through the reentry process is incredibly isolating. Even though you're with a lot of people, you are really all by yourself, and there's a lot of shame and guilt that gets associated with being incarcerated. So relationships were incredibly important and critical to me being able to get through that. Relationships with men that I made, relationships with men that I met when I was locked up, maintaining relationships with my family, and then once I got out, the relationships I made with people, the advice they could give me, mentors I had. And so I couldn't do it all on my own. I know I needed help, I needed support from other people, And when we look at criminal justice, reforming in Connecticut, obviously no organization, no individual is going to be able to do it all by themselves. Everybody has a part to play. So Smart Justice is a sort of an advocacy campaign here in Connecticut. We are the Connecticut chapter of a national campaign, but the two broad goals of the campaign are to end mass incarceration and fight racism within the criminal justice system in Connecticut. We officially launched our campaign in July, focused on the governor's race and the election during the summer and into the fall. One of our major successes was in October when we were able to get two of the candidates, Ned Lamont and Oz Griebel, to publish criminal justice reform platforms on their website. The other candidate did not, who lost the election. Once Governor Lamont won and was going to be the governor, we were part of his transition team, part of the criminal justice transition team in November and December. Now Smart Justice is kind of moving into the legislative phase of our campaign. We have two legislative priorities we're working on right now. One is HB 6921, which had a public hearing a couple of weeks ago. We had a terrific turnout in the state capitol for that. It's an anti-discrimination bill covering everything from employment, housing, education, access to credit and insurance, a really broad, aspirational, ambitious bill. Just to start the conversation about that, because we know that when it comes to reentry, there are a host of barriers that formerly incarcerated people face, anybody actually with a criminal record, criminal history faces, when they're trying to get their lives back on track. And also, in a couple of weeks, on Monday, the 25th, there's going to be a public hearing for another bill that we're prioritizing, SB 880, which is a prosecutorial transparency bill. It's sort of a data collection piece, which will require OPM to publish annually a host of data related to the decisions that prosecutors make in our state. Right now, a lot of that information is not readily accessible. Everything having to do with people that are sentenced to prison, people that go into diversionary programs, probation, parole, a whole host of data that is not easily accessible. And so that bill would require OPM to publish that data, collect that data, and then publish it on its website. So we're really focused on legislative proposals right now. We've also supported housing issues, voting for people on parole. We're kind of spread all over the place legislatively right now. But it's good to get out of Hartford, though, and come here and talk to a different crowd of people instead of state senators and representatives.
Thanks, Gus. And thanks, Cecil. Yeah, I mean, we saw this as a tremendous opportunity to get all you folks in the same room, because we have normally about 300 people here from all over the system, and it's a tremendous opportunity. We know how the grind is at the legislature, and sometimes, there's so many voices at once, that not everybody knows what everybody's doing. So we saw this as an opportunity just to be able to allow you all to speak to these folks. We're also doing this Facebook Live so that people can hear what's going on in the various corners of the advocacy world. And so, speaking of which, I'd like to bring Rob Hebert in next, who is representing the Connecticut Reentry Collaborative and also Bridgeport Reentry Roundtable, among other things. But, Gus, you talked about the work that you did to ensure that the folks running for governor had a platform on criminal justice, and I think that was a tremendous work that you did to be able to push that to the fore. And I know you talked about being on the transition team. I think it was Dave McGuire that was on there. And Rob, you also sat on that transition team, and I think had some experience on being able to get that information in front of our new governor, and maybe talk a little bit about that and what's happening in the world of the Reentry Collaborative.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's kind of neat to be here. I graduated from CCSU some time ago. One of my old professors is with us today, Trevor Johnson. I often tell people, and he never ages. It's strange. You know, I often tell people that I got to where I am mainly because I came in contact with a slew of amazing people, including Trevor and many of the instructors here. So, like Andrew said, I chair the Bridgeport Reentry Collaborative. Of those of you that don't know the history of the roundtables, I will just tell you really quick. Back in May of 2007, my boss, Scott Wilderman, the CEO of Career Resources, and Steve Lanza, who at the time was the Executive Director of Family Reentry, found that folks coming out of incarceration were being underserved in the community, and they didn't really know what to do about it. So they convened a group of like-minded people down in Bridgeport to see how they could work together more collaboratively to address the issue. Since that time, 7 other roundtables have shot up across the state. There's one being formed in Torrington now, and another one that's going to be coming online in Danbury. So that's sort of the network that's grown. Regarding the transition team, what had happened last year was that I got a call from Earl Bloodworth, who is the chair of the New Haven Roundtable, and he got me on to this clean slate legislation that had recently been passed in Pennsylvania. We had a brief conversation, and I immediately turned to our Bridgeport delegation, specifically Representative Chris Rosario. I called him and I asked him if we could have a meeting, and I think it was 3 days' time. He came over to the Career Resources office and met with myself and some other people from the Bridgeport community, and he agreed to champion that cause in the legislature. About the same time, Sue Gunderman started harassing Andrew about redoing the reentry strategy. So we got involved in that. Also at the same time, I had reached out to the Tao Foundation, who I'd like to take a moment to thank for supporting the work that went into drafting the reentry strategy revision. And at the time, I wanted to get a small grant from them to help just keep some of the smaller reentry councils going, because it does take a lot of time and resources to continue to convene these meetings. And then a funny thing happened. I got a call one night it was an email from Kathy Malloy asking me to join probably the same one you got, Gus, or David. Yeah. To join the CJ Committee on Governor Lallant's transition team. So I thought to myself, I have this reentry strategy in my hand that's just about finished. Maybe I'll be fortunate enough to slide it into the governor's first 100-day plan and sort of make his life easy and give us more of a voice and maybe get some of our goals accomplished faster. If you've read the governor's first 100 days memo, you'll see there's conversation in there about legalization of marijuana, clean slate legislation, voter rights for folks on parole, increasing the exposure to folks getting their IDs when they're released from prison. And so that really came out of the the reentry strategy document. So we got really lucky. We don't often get timing and good fortune like that, but in this case we did. Really can't speak of yet the first 100 days guarantees. I guess perhaps at Reentry Reform Day on April 3rd, we'll have a better handle on that. But I did notice in the governor's budget there's an increased funds to community-based programming. It's kind of a general term. I don't know what it's going to look like, but there's also an increase in funds for identification. What it looks like when the budget's finalized, we'll see. But at least he made a commitment to it. I guess that's all I have, but thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rob. Rob brings such tremendous energy to this work. I mean, he's often going to all of the councils and the roundtables, ensuring that they're meeting and successful, and he helped to spearhead the opening of the couple new ones that we have. So I'm just very thankful for Rob and all of his efforts in this area. I talked about in the 2006 legislation, it was the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division was created. Another thing that we collectively believed was important was in the front end of sentencing, taking a look at these kind of anecdotal sentencing practices that were happening, things like school drug zone laws. When you dug a little deeper as to how they came about and asked for the intended consequences of that, you often found that not a lot of thought went into that, believe it or not, especially as they expanded. And it was all based on perception. It wasn't based on actually information on what was happening. And then that it disproportionately impacted certain people, that folks weren't really collecting that information as well. And so the idea was, and Vera actually at the time helped Connecticut with the sentencing task force. And so we put that into legislation, which eventually became in 2010 the Connecticut Sentencing Commission, which has been doing work since that time in the area of sentencing reform and even larger criminal justice reform. And so I thought it was a good opportunity, because the Sentencing Commission every year puts in legislative recommendations to have Alex come as the executive director of the commission to talk a little bit about what the commission is up to now and what are the various proposals on the table that very well may have public hearings coming up. So.
Thank you. Good morning. So thank you for having me here, and thank you for being here. I joined the commission about 3.5 years ago now, and it's just been a blast. Prior to that, I worked for the Judicial Branch Court Support Services Division, and prior to that, worked the legislature for a while. And throughout that time, I went to law school, thinking that I'm going to be a lawyer and practice law. And then slowly I realized, as much as I love law school, that I don't really want to practice law in the traditional sense, and that I absolutely have to do something that I enjoy and something where I can make a difference. And so Sentencing Commission is it for me, and we're doing some interesting things that I'll be glad to talk to you about. To give you some background on the commission, it's a state agency by statute, so it's a permanent criminal justice agency. We have 23 members. Most of them are leaders of their respective agencies. We have 4 judges, including the chief court administrator, the chief state attorney, and another prosecutor, the chief public defender, representatives of the private bar, a couple of police chiefs, Bill Dyson as a member, Commission of Correction, and a couple of other commissioners, and then each caucus of the legislature and the governor have appointees to the commission, and those members tend to be more on the advocacy side. So it's a unique mix of what I would call system stakeholders and advocates who come together, and the idea is to look into various areas of law and practice and policy and make policy recommendations to the legislature and to the governor. And then we take a very active role in the legislative process too, because we know that if we just file a report or submit some recommendations to the Judiciary Committee, absolutely nothing will happen, especially the stuff that we're talking about that's could be quite controversial. So every year we'll submit a legislative package to the Judiciary Committee, and this year is no exception. I'll mention a couple proposals that I think may be of interest, and these are proposals that affect populations that I think are often forgotten in these conversations. The first one is a change to the misdemeanor sentencing reform. It's Senate Bill 948. Write it down. We just had a public hearing on that, and that went well. The bill would reduce the maximum sentence for misdemeanor cases by 1 day, which seems like a very small change, technical change, and it is, but it will affect a lot of people and in a major way. The goal here is really to prevent some of the really harsh immigration consequences that can result from a misdemeanor conviction. And it's a bit technical, but essentially there's a disconnect between the state criminal code that defines misdemeanors as crimes, convictions that carry up to 1 year in prison, and federal immigration policy. Under federal law, certain convictions that carry up to, that carry a sentence of 1 year or more could be designated as either aggravated felonies or crimes against moral turpitude, which is kind of a silly legal concept. But both of those carry very harsh consequences in terms of deportation, especially the aggravated felonies. Once something is classified as aggravated felony, that's pretty much a fast track to deportation. You lose all your defenses against deportation, such as asylum, protections for domestic violence victims, cancellation of removal, and you also can never come back as an aggravated felon. So this modest change in the law, a reduction of misdemeanor sentences by 1 day from 365 days to 364 days, would shield a lot of people and provide those additional protections that exist for everybody else. We had that bill last year. We got it out of the committee with a pretty good vote, but then it was never taken up, unfortunately, for a vote by the House of Representatives. This year we have a lot of hopes for it. A lot of people helping out with us, including ACLU and others. And on a related note, advocates like ACLU and others are working to amend the current Trust Act in Connecticut. That's the law that deals with the degree to which various state entities could cooperate with ICE. And certain protections are really needed. We hope to help with that this year. Essentially, that would require that for the state entities to cooperate with ICE and honor ICE retainers, judicial warrant would be necessary. That's the gist of the bill. The second proposal that I wanted to talk about deals with the sex offender registry, something that almost nobody wants to talk about, especially the legislature, but we really should. In 2015, a law was passed that mandated the Sentencing Commission to study pretty much everything sex offender related, from sentencing to registry to management to treatment. And that's what we did. We took 2 years to do this. We brought together many different groups from all walks of life and came up with a set of recommendations that largely focus on the registry, but although there are some other recommendations in there. And the proposal really tries to make sense. It doesn't get rid of the registry, but it tries to make some sense out of the registry if we're going to have it. A debate that really never took place in Connecticut. We just passed this legislation, just like all the other states, and created these sex offender registries. But there was very, very little debate. If you look at legislative history, there was almost no conversation about it. And so we're starting that now. The proposal has two main components. First is a move from a conviction-based registry to a risk-based registry. Right now, certain convictions would place one on the registry for 10 years, and other convictions would place one on a lifetime registry. We are creating a new board that would classify people based on risk, and some of the lower risk people will be placed on the law enforcement only registry, only available to police and other law enforcement agencies. It will not be on the website, while other high risk individuals will remain on the public registry. Second part of the proposal creates a removal mechanism for the first time in Connecticut. We're one of the very few states that does not have a removal mechanism from the registry. Lifetime registration means lifetime. So somebody could be in hospice and they're still required to send these quarterly notifications to state police, and it really gets pretty absurd, but there's no flexibility in that system. You're just there as a lifetime registrant. And so this bill for the first time would allow certain people under certain conditions to petition the court for removal. It's prospective only, well, it's prospective for the most part. Certain people would be able to petition the court, others will be able to petition to move to a law enforcement only registry. But those are some of the compromises that had to be made in this work. I should say that we operate by consensus within the commission. We try to get everybody, all members, to agree to our proposals before we bring it up to the legislature. And for those who have been involved in this work, know how much work that takes and how exhausting that could be. And sometimes we just can't get there. Sometimes we have to make very tough choices and compromises. But by having that process in place, that's what gives us credibility in the legislature. If we can get the chief state's attorney, and the chief public defender, and the chief court administrator, and the advocates all agree on a proposal, it must be a good idea, right? Or at least it's worth hearing. And so that's our selling point to the legislature. The registry bill, we've had a lot of resistance from the legislature, simply because it's not a topic they want to discuss. But we did have a public hearing last year, and after some resistance, we're actually going to get a public hearing this year, and hope that many of you will show up and testify in favor of the bill, and hopefully we can move it forward. No bill number on that yet.
Thank you. And what I will note about all these things is normally a lot of this legislation emanates from the Judiciary Committee. I know with the Sentencing Commission, it traditionally has always gone through the Judiciary. One of the things that people, I think, are fascinated to realize that the Prison Overcrowding Act emanated from the Appropriations Committee. So it was essentially looked at as a budget implementation tool. And a lot of these proposals that folks have talked about today, so the voting rights and others, are in other committees this year. And I think that's a tremendous change as well that broadens the conversation to legislators and people that may have never heard about these issues if they're looking at them in their own particular vein. And with their own particular site. One of the things that we've been fascinated as we've dug in through the Sentencing Commission and otherwise on this voting rights issue, and people that, you know, most people don't know, like, yeah, if you're on probation, you can vote. If you're on parole, you can't. But the way that parole was defined historically was, one, antiquated because that statute is old enough that there's a number of new things now that are Connecticut is doing that could technically maybe be considered in parole. But also that, you know, anybody with a misdemeanor conviction can actually vote and is supposed to be able to afford the right to vote in prison. And there's roughly, I think, I hope I don't get this number wrong, Mary, you might be able to correct me, around 500 or so individuals that are in prison simply with a misdemeanor conviction that should be afforded the right to vote. Anybody that's pretrial should be afforded the right to vote. But the Committee of Cognizance, who most likely was part of the drafting of the bill, did not necessarily know anything about the corrections system or the judicial system or the justice system. So when they wrote that, and you're looking to figure out how the heck you implement it, neither the Secretary of the State nor the Department of Correction really actually knows what to do, so they essentially fall on the safe side and tell people, well, to be safe so that you're not breaking the law, don't vote. And that, I don't think anybody would agree is the best way to go about things. And so that by broadening this conversation to these larger committees, I think it's in a way of educating and informing even more people that don't necessarily know about this system, about the complexity of it, and about some of the ways that we can create mindful and deliberate solutions to it. And I want to bring in Sagacity at this point. Walker, who works for Everyday Democracy, because so much about what they do is bringing people to the table to educate on these issues. We were involved in an event, and I know Anderson and Gus were at this as well as others a few months back, where we brought in a fellow that used to work under Clinton, who resigned because of the welfare reform package, and he wrote a book, Peter Edelman, on it's not a crime to be poor, and talking about how just simply being poor in Connecticut, but also nationwide, leads you directly into the justice system through fines and other things that are levied. And Everyday Democracy, we've been working with in the Institute way back when, since we first received funds for children that have incarcerated parents, and they really helped to bring us to the communities most impacted in Hartford with this issue and craft up solutions from the ground up. And so I just wanted to be able to have Sagacity and Everyday Democracy share some of what you're doing and how you see your role in this work.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. Sounds like y'all need another cup of coffee. But I work with Everyday Democracy. What we do is we focus on doing trainings and coaching for communities that want to do community dialogues, right? So this morning I'm hearing a lot of people talking about the importance. Darryl brought up the importance of community systems and individuals, right? So what we do is with our dialogues is we provide an approach and a model to bring all these actors together, so that way we can create the kind of community that we would like to. We've been around for about 30 years. We don't just focus on criminal justice. We focus on a lot of different social issues, but we bring special attention to racial equity. That's like our big bailiwick. So we got involved here in Connecticut because we started working in Crook County, Chicago, as people call it. We started doing some work out there because they're trying to work on lessening the amount of people that they put into their judicial system, right? And then we're also expanding that work into North Carolina and also Washington State as well. We're based in Hartford, but we do work nationally. And one of the things we've noticed is we want to do more work in Connecticut. So that's one of the reasons why we're on the collaborative that put together the Time to Talk event. As Andrew had just mentioned, we had folks like Kenyatta from Catal, and we had Darryl, Gus, a bunch of other folks help put that together. Because like we said, what we like to do is bring community members together and have them have dialogues and conversations about how any social issues is affecting them. And then once they have these conversations and build relationships with one another, then they're able to say, okay, well, this is what we want to do to address this particular issue. And then they come up with action ideas, and we provide a method and approach that will allow them to do this in a safe space. People are about safe spaces nowadays, right? So what we do is provide that environment for that to happen, and then also connecting the grassroots and grass top, so that in that way, when people have these action ideas on how they can address whatever social issue it is, in this case, criminal justice, then they're able to meet up with the people who actually can make things go in action. And we like to, we like to say that if we're making an impact, we make impacts on individuals, right? So just being in a community dialogue, you're having conversations with people who don't think like you, who don't look like you. You're talking about an issue that does affect you, right? So that way you change as an individual. And we also focus on collective action. These are things where it's small groups of people that are able to get together and work on something. Like as Darryl brought up earlier, he was talking about, just saying welcome home to people who do come home. Say if you were to, I live in Hartford, so I'll use Hartford as an example. If Hartford was to put together a group of folks who are just regular community members, and we like to say, you know what? Every month or so, when the people who come back home from being incarcerated, we throw them a party and say, welcome back. Connect them to different resources and organizations, whatever have you, right? That would be a collective action. And then we also like to focus on institutional and policy change. So after these community dialogues, people to get together, they have these conversations. We look at, short, medium, and long-term goals. One of the long-term goals would be things like, how can we change, certain policies? That's why, we get involved with folks who, when they are going to the LOB and such, as we were a couple weeks ago with Gus and Anderson, right? Because we do want to see these types of change in our community. So we look at it on all of those different levels. And again, I love the CSI component of this. So if anybody is interested in, doing community dialogues or looking at ways to bring folks together, Everyday Democracy does have that model. Our website, everydaydemocracy.org. So that's what we do as an organization. And the work that we did do in Hartford with the Time to Talk event that some folks in the room were at, we do want to bring that to New Haven and also create other spaces throughout the state so we're able to do this, whether it be on college campuses, community colleges, et cetera, because the criminal justice system is something that touches a lot of us in a lot of different ways. Whether it's you who was directly involved, a cousin, a brother, or uncle, somebody who was involved, sister, mother, right? it does affect you, so your voice should be at the table. So what we like to do is create a space for people who this is affecting, and we have a model for that. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sagacity. And I also want to note that Richard Frieder and Liz DuPont-Deal, who are going to be part of the breakout sessions, I also originally met through Everyday Democracy and the work that they were doing there. Maybe not Liz. Liz got involved a little bit later in that, but it's tremendous. And Richard, through his role in the Hartford Public Library and thinking about libraries as assets and how we move this forward. And I love how Everyday Democracy looks to collaborate across the board with folks and really identify those assets. And it reminds me, too, of like who we've had here over the years and I think about like Lorenzo and Larice Harvey with A Better Way and the community conversations they were having originally on the crack powder stuff and places outside of Hartford and in the suburbs and the like. And then, you know, the Malta Justice Initiative and John Santa and Kathy Taylor and the like, the conversations they were having out. And I think for me, it's such an imperative aspect of this. I was talking earlier about it, the committees getting a little bit broader sense of this, but also bringing this education and action campaign outside of the jurisdictions that are most impacted, I think is important because there are a lot of people in those communities that just don't know, but that when they get informed, they want to take action. We found that a lot with the Life on Parole video that we brought along to many different communities and many different libraries. And we found that there were so many people that didn't know anything about the system that wanted to get involved afterwards and support. And, you know, Rob mentioned Reentry Reform Day, and we're going to have the second one of those this year, hopefully partnering with everyone here and also with the Commission on Equity and Opportunity to really bring these collective voices to the Capitol and just show how many, you know, Daryl, we were talking last night over dinner about, you know, how many people are impacted by having a criminal conviction. And, you know, the Boston Fed did a report a few years back and essentially assumed or made the projection that roughly 1 in 3 individuals has some type of a criminal background. And that's a huge constituency that if they spoke collectively, if we all spoke collectively, would have a massive impact on how things get done in hopefully the very ways that we're talking about today. One group that fills that space tremendously also is the NAACP, and it's not, it's last but certainly not least, and a friend of mine and a neighbor, Corey Betts, I want to bring to the table too, and the reason why I'm calling on him last is to give him a little time to warm up, because I know he's not normally up in front of folks, but he has such a tremendous story and a tremendous voice, and you know, probably can talk a little bit about what Hartford is looking to do as an NAACP chapter. I know Maxine Robinson, who's the new chair there, I worked with. She was the chair of a school governance council, and I saw the passion and advocacy that she brought to ensure that every kid in Hartford is best served by the school system. And SGCs, for those that don't know, are collectives of just these same types of groups, parents and community members trying to push the system to do better by the kids when sometimes it feels like the system is somewhat intractable. So Corey, I'd love to hear and have you share some of your thoughts on this.
Good morning. As you said, my name is Corey Betts. I am the new chair of criminal justice for the NAACP. I am new to the chair, but I'm not new to the criminal justice system. I am formerly incarcerated, have been through the system as well, and know the struggles that individuals have gone through and still go through today, because I'm still on the ground hearing their stories. And what I find to be a little intriguing as we sitting here and we're talking about those people who are affected by these issues, and a lot of times they're not at the table, and I think it's very important to have them at the table when we're having these discussions. And reason being, we can say this is all that the people need, and we know they need this and they need that, And if they're not at the table telling us what their needs are, we're not able to keep them accountable, right? So with that being said, I think it's very important that we even educate them on legislation and who their state reps are so that they know who they can go to and who's that voice for them. So me being a new chair of the criminal justice here in Hartford, looking for a committee as well, I'm looking to build those bridges so that they know that they do have a voice at the table, that they can go to the state legislator's office and tell their stories and let people know the struggles that they go through daily. And I think in doing so, when people do hear that story, it changes the narrative to what our state reps tend to do, because a lot of times they say they're gonna do this, that, and the other prior to them getting in office, and when they get in office, those people who are challenged or are having those challenges aren't getting the needs met. So I think it's very important us, even right now as a community, tell and talk about those things and let those people who are affected by the criminal justice system that they do have a voice, that their past is not dictating their future, and allowing them to a platform to be their voices. You know, I can remember prior to me coming and becoming the chair of criminal justice, I worked for a substance abuse program, so I see the disparities, I see the struggles that individuals have, even coming from incarceration. And Brother Scott Exdale, the president of the NAACP, comes to me and we're talking. I work with Fred X and Kenny Jackson, and we were talking about the importance of having people at the table. You know, there's a lot of times, again, I have to say it again, that they're having these meetings, but the people who are being affected by these issues aren't at the table, and I think it's very important that they're at the table. So that's where my spearhead is coming from right now, and then being a new chair, that having those individuals come and educating them and letting them know, listen, you can't look for change if you're not in contact with your state reps, or if you're not being that voice for yourself. So with me coming in, that's, and I think it's very important for us to move forward in doing that. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Corey. So I'm just gonna, thank you, Corey. I'm just gonna ask one kind of broad question, and then put it out to the audience to also ask some questions and do some Q&A and interaction with the panel. But just broadly, per the theme of this panel as well, is, you know, talking individually about what each other is doing and sometimes collectively, I'd like to have folks speak to perhaps what are the other assets that you see in the communities, either in the Hartfords or the New Havens or the Bridgeports or the Waterburys and New Britons and the like, the other assets that are looking to provide this oversight and accountability to the system that Corey's talking about, and how can we ensure, if it's indeed possible or desirable, that we work together to do make sure that the system changes for the very people and communities that you're talking about. So.
It was one thing talking to Brother Darrell. He's like, you know, we have these silos, you know, you have these organizations where as though everybody is just trying to get theirs. And I think in doing that, we hurt the ones that we are saying that we're looking to help. So coming collectively, I can remember going to a workshop, and you know, we are all our own islands, but you know, if you go to the surface of islands, we are all connected in some way or fashion or form. And to realize that we're connected, like, again, you know, all of us have had someone who has been affected by the criminal justice system, whether indirectly or directly. So being able to say, okay, my little brother or my uncle or, you know, a cousin from years ago has been affected by that, let us all come together collectively as a team, and let's get these issues fixed together. So.
Anyone else? I'll prompt a few. If not, I know, Alex, you've been,
I'll go ahead.
one of the big things that you want to do is, I've been working on the commission is bail reform, and I know it's been brought up by other things. It's one of the three major population drivers that are keeping us from further decarceration is pretrial, as well as Kenyatta mentioned women, and what we generally talk about here is the reentry population. And I know you've also kind of overlapped also with immigration, with bail, and various groups, and maybe talk about that a little bit and how that's either that supported the work of the commission potentially.
Yeah, it's definitely been one of the most frustrating experiences on the commission so far is inability to come to a proposal that would provide for comprehensive bail reform. And it's also frustrating that we don't really see conversations on bail happening anywhere else. I mean, we've talked about it within the commission for several years, but I don't hear anybody else talking about it. Hardly any conversation in press, no lawsuits, no policy discussions, at least not on the level where they should be. And you know, the pretrial justice system, to me, is the most nonsensical part of the criminal justice system, or injustice system, whatever you call it. And you cannot fix criminal justice system or criminal injustice system without fixing bail. You just can't do it. And as Andrew mentioned, the data is clear on that. I mean, the sentenced population has been going down steadily. The pretrial population has remained the same for I don't know how long, and there's no signs of it changing. And there's just a lot of issues with it. I mean, I'll just mention some that come really stem from the state using money bail, just like many other jurisdictions. Most jurisdictions use money bail. Problem number one: if you use money bail, you will always have some people in jail who just should not be there, right? You can impose a bond that would require somebody to post $100, and maybe 8 out of 10 people will be able to post that, but 2 will not, right? And so somebody ends up in jail just because they're too poor. On the other hand, money bail leads to at least some people who are out in the community who probably should be in jail. And we can all disagree about, you know, how many people should be in pretrial. Some people believe that nobody should be detained pretrial, that people are presumed innocent, and everybody should be out pretrial. And that's a view you can take. I tend to think that pretrial detention is okay, but it should be very limited, and there should be sufficient due process allowed. Not something that we just don't do right now. But right now we have people posting huge amounts of bond. It could be $1 million, and the person is out. And how does having money correlate with somebody being too dangerous to be out in the community? They just, there's no correlation there. Problem number 3, perhaps most troubling, go to an arraignment and observe some of these things. You hear a bond, let's say, of $20,000. Right? What does that mean? What is the intention of the system there? Is it to detain that person on $20,000? Is it to release that person on $20,000? It turns out that there really is no intention to do either thing, right? It's, both outcomes are completely okay. That person can post a bond and be out, and everybody says, I did my job, and that person could be detained if they don't have anything, and you can point to that person's criminal history and say, well, job well done. And in what world, other than bail, is it okay to have either outcome of release or detention for any given individual that gets a bond? It just makes no sense. And we did a report a couple years ago within the commission where we showed data that looked at similarly situated individuals controlling for charge and controlling for risk, and then when controlling for bond amount. So we had people, let's say, who, let's take Class C felony. So you take people who are convicted of Class C felony, same risk assessment score, let's say -7, and same bond amount, $20,000. And not surprisingly, some of the people are detained and some of the people are released. And it's like that across the board for all charges, for all risk levels, for all bond amounts. And that's because different people have different abilities to pay. And some people have money, and some don't. And problem number 4, when you hear really high bond amounts and arraignments, like $1 million, everybody knows, pretty much everybody knows in the courtroom that that's, the intention there is really to detain, right? I mean, that's the only tool that's available to prosecutors and judges to detain somebody, and it's a very high bond amount that defendants are unlikely to meet, and that will result in detention. And there are huge constitutional problems there, right? Because that's not the purpose of bail. You cannot detain somebody with money on purpose, and yet that's what's happening every day. And everybody pretends like it wasn't done on purpose, like it's a reasonable bond for that particular case, but yet we all know that the intention there is to detain, and most of the time people are detained. There are a lot of other problems with bail I can get into, but there are some good things in the system compared to other jurisdictions in that we already have a pretrial agency with CSSD. We already utilize risk assessment, and we can have a whole conference on risk assessments. But those are some of the tools that already exist, and really what we need to do is to come together and figure out the solution, because everybody agrees that money bail is no good, but to get rid of it, we have to change our constitution and allow judges to detain certain individuals under certain circumstances, and it's got to be very limited. And that's what we haven't done together. And the progressive movements and the left really have no answer to what the bail reform should look like. And we've tried to do that with the commission. We're still working on it. One of the things we just did, we sent a letter to the Rules Committee of the Superior Court to expand the 10% cash option. For those who don't know, 10% cash option exists just together with surety bonds, but it has to be done by motion by the defendant, and it has to be granted by a judge. What we suggested is that it be available for all defendants whenever a surety bond is imposed. Defendants would have an opportunity to either post it with a bail bondsman, where they put down a certain amount and they never see that again. That's the fee. Or they can put it down with the court, 10% cash, and actually get their money back at the conclusion of their case. And we think that would be a fair and just outcome. Now, that wouldn't fix all the bail issues, because for somebody who doesn't have any money, it doesn't really matter who you're supposed to pay. You just don't have that money, and you will be detained. But for those who can't put together some amount of money, we think it will be a better and fair outcome. And so that's a proposal that's very difficult, if not impossible, to pass through the legislature. We've tried, but the Rules Committee of the Superior Court can take it up and hopefully pass that. And I can talk about bail for
Yes, Alex.
for
can talk
hours
about
if you know
bail.
me.
As you can well know, as someone who shares an office, we know full well of bail. But it is a fascinating and like you're pointing out, Alex, a part of the system that really, until actually Renee had looked at it through program review years back, it seems like every so often they take a whack at maybe doing something there, but it ends up back in the same place for the most part. Anyway, Rob, you were going to mention something?
Well, you were asking about assets in the community, and it's, a long time ago, like I said, I graduated from here, I guess it's 22 years or so. I remember just going back in my mind how much things have changed, how far we've come, but yet how far we have to go. I was telling you at dinner last night, I remember working at a co-ed AIC, residential, in Waterbury, way back when. And the way in which people worked together back then was basically non-existent. Over the years, I've seen it get a little bit better. Somebody mentioned, I forget who it was, that different agencies can sometimes be looking out for themselves and trying to get theirs, and especially this time of year when grant applications are going out fast and furious and working into the midnight hours. I just think that more and more agencies have to look at, working together co-applicants, pooling their resources. I think we could do a much better job. I recently met with Fred from Family Reentry and his staff, and we're potentially looking at doing something together. I just think it's smart. The pool of money has shrunk. The problems are sometimes more profound. We know our population, our prison population, has shrunk considerably. Those that are left are highly barriered, and frankly, from my agency, Career Resources, we can do employment assistance and education, but we can't help with mental health and addiction. We just can't do it. We don't have the bandwidth at all to try to help those situations. So, us working in conjunction with like a CCAR or Family Reentry that's got the DV services. I just think that's going to be a smarter, more effective model going forward, and I'm hoping that other agencies can more often let down their guard and work together. That was just my only thought I had.
Thank you. Kenyatta, and then if anybody wants, there's a few mics up here, and we'll move to the audience questions now.
The community itself is a resource. I think so often, and it was mentioned several times throughout the panel, I think so often we don't look at actual community members who have been directly impacted, and we also see those family members as directly impacted because mom who has to post bail and mom who has to put money in commissary, mom who's talking to the court and probation and the jails, they are just as impacted as the person who's incarcerated. Thank you very much. So I think we have to look at the actual community members as a resource and as an asset, and I don't think we do enough of that. I think it's great that we're talking about the actual agencies coming together because that's important, but I also think it's necessary to allot spots for people in the communities who have these ideas, and this is again the perspective of a community organizer who listens to the voices of people who are routinely marginalized, people who are purposefully not at the table, people who purposefully are not taught to, whose leadership is not developed. And I think if we don't do that work, we are going to just continue to miss the problem. I think everyone in this room has had an idea around criminal justice reform and probably felt like I can't speak up on it, or maybe I'm not, the person on the panel, I'm not the person with the letters after my name. That doesn't matter. You are just as important in the conversation, and I just would be remiss if we didn't actually talk about the people who are involved in this and talking about bringing them into the table as well.
Anybody have anything they want to share from the audience? Any questions? Wait, is that Kenny? All right.
What's up, Andrew?
How are you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kenny Jackson. And a lot of times we talk about having us at the table. And I just want to go back some years and kind of commend Andrew because he was kind of at one of the forefront of having us at the table because I was on a panel at one of the first building bridges that he had. And one of my things was, when I was at Family Reentry, we was building this program called Fresh Start. And Steve Lanza, who's not only my mentor, but Fred's mentor, Dai's mentor, James Gantt's mentor, and all of us are ex-offenders. And one of the things that I talked to him, because he brought me on board first, was you cannot continue to make laws for us without having us at the table. And like Bill said so eloquently, if we're not at the table, okay, things go by that we miss. And if we created a lot of this stuff, why not have us at the table? We've been giving back since we've been out, and it's not a job. We owe. Because we took so much from our community, we have to give back. And who better can clean up the mess than those who dirtied up the mess? And you have to continue that, men and women, you know, mothers and fathers. And I'm semi-retired now because I've been out of prison 24 years. And I've done a lot. And if you be in this cleanup thing a lot and you give back, those spirits kind of attach you to you. And you have to reflect and learn how to pick and choose your battles, or you will go crazy. My passion now is the fathers who are not only in the system, the fathers who are out of the system, because 2 of my sons followed me to prison. And if we don't get involved with the fathers, the sons are just going to continue to follow them to penitentiary. My son was in jail 21 years for murder. It was important for me to have him paroled to another state, because even though I'm far removed, if I would have brought him to the same city, if I would have let him parole to the same city, and the victims would have seen him out there smiling, laughing, and joking, that would open up a whole nother Pandora's box, and those wounds would have resurfaced, and next thing you know, my son could have been on the chopping block of getting his head blown off. And that's my son. You know, so it's important that we do be at the table, because there's some undercurrent conversations that we need to have in order to really get with these issues that's going on. Because we can also clean up this stuff that's going on up in the schools too. Give us another platform other than just this. Thanks.
Next, I think we had Councilman Deutsch, and then we have a few folks here.
Good morning. I got here a little late, but I'm not certain if a specific item has been mentioned, so I'll just run through it. Historically, in 2011, there was an act concerning sentence modification. It was brought up by Senator Coleman at that time, and it got through a raised bill and a joint favorable from Judiciary, but for several years running, it's been either blocked or dropped at the last minute. My name is Larry Deutsch, and I'm the Hartford City Council, and the specific case is in our area, a constituent of ours, but I was on I became familiar with the jury many years before being on City Council. In any case, this is someone who was in an act when he was under 16, received a 50-year sentence, and he recommended, and some of us now are following his suggestion, that we review the act concerning sentence modification, because of all things, as a matter of justice, in order to have a hearing for sentence modification, there's a requirement that the state's attorney, the original prosecutor, agree to have a hearing, a sentence modification hearing. And many of us find that deeply offensive, that the incarcerated person should be depending on the state's attorney's agreement or permission simply to get a rehearing of the duration of his sentence, whether or not there's been a good performance within an institution like Cheshire Correctional Institution, so-called. So therefore, the point I'm trying to make is that we have missed some deadlines with Judiciary Committee. We need more concurrence in order to strike that provision within the original legislation, or have new legislation, that the state's attorney approve. It seems so paradoxical in terms of just American justice that you can't have a hearing to reconsider the duration of the original sentence. And so I don't know what more to say, not being an attorney, but that we had just a couple days ago before the Hartford City Council unanimous agreement on a resolution to bring this to the attention of our state legislators. And Robin Porter and Gary Winfield and some others are aware, but with so much to do, apparently it's been dropped. So I would like to suggest beg that this be introduced perhaps as an amendment to one of the other similar measures to bring justice to sentencing and reconsideration, especially in view of the Supreme Court's decision, which everyone knows characterizes defendants, especially very young ones, to have a consideration of modern times and concepts of whether there's criminality, there's true rehabilitation, and so on. So, again, I'd just like to close by saying that we have a few weeks in this session, perhaps to amend or introduce such a measure simply to bring justice for reconsideration without requiring the prosecutor's approval, which is so paradoxical for many of us. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. And I know you bring up an issue that's been vexing a lot of people for a lot of times, Councilman. I'm not sure where that's going to go this session, but I mean, what I'd say with that is there's a couple things for me. The one that the City Council came together and voted on it is not something that historically has happened. The fact that city councils are paying attention to state legislation is important, and it's that kind of next phase of what's happening with the cities taking ownership of the folks coming back and saying we want to change. The other thing that it kind of highlights is this notion of that we explore in the reentry document, but also that we've been exploring in Connecticut as a state is, you know, what is the purpose of the justice system? As we've experienced it in the past 30 years, it's been perpetual punishment, which also kind of speaks to the types of things that you're talking about. But in the various systems that we've looked at overseas, they look at being incarcerated as taking away of freedom, and that is the punishment. And the rest of it is about resocialization and rehabilitation. And in that phase, there's opportunities for the very things that you're talking about. But who knows if they do something this session, but it's kind of what we're contemplating in this conference. Is there a collective that comes together that says the whole framework that we're talking about needs to be spearheaded by the community and by the people most impacted so that these types of things reach the level of importance. The other thing I'll say is that you suggest, and the other thing that I'll say and that the City Council suggests, the other thing I'll say is we focus a lot on the laws, and one of the things that we're trying to do here today is also look at the implementation side of things. If you are implementing things correctly, if we're holding the system accountable for that resocialization, for reintegration, then I think that ask becomes a little bit easier on the other side of it. And we really have not done a tremendously good job of holding the system accountable for the folks that are inside, the very people Daryl talked about earlier, and the folks
We've
that
even
Corey.
brought the point before Labor and Workforce Committee, where many times trying to hire women and minorities, the claim is that they can't find them to work within the city, whether it be construction or some other projects. And we find sometimes the youth of our city are robbed by being incarcerated for this duration rather than being productive workers. So there's plenty of applications in order to get people who were young, all of us were young, but some are still in prison, and join the workforce rather than be incarcerated at huge expense to the state and losing their rights. So many correlations, and so to wait another 2 years, again, it's huge expense to the individual, to the family, and to the state. So that's another reason why it's offensive, and we appear so compassionate about this. Each year that goes by, we've been waiting now since 2011. So I just say, let's do it.
Yeah, I got you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Frank Mallitz. I'm from New London, Connecticut. Mr. Moderator and panelists, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for this convening because it's amazing. I'm having deja vu right now. 2 years ago in February 2017, I joined our mayor's task force to solve our problem of substance abuse in New London County. And what I'm hearing today is very reminiscent of what I heard 2 years ago. I believe that we are living in silos, There are celebrated successes by everyone in this room, but we're losing the war. We are losing the war because we are not pulling the oars together. And Mr. Moderator, you raised the point, and I've heard it several times this morning, we're all talking about the system. And I'm here to tell you as a retired orthopedic surgeon that your system is not broken, and I know broken. The reason is we do not have a system. We do not have a justice ecosystem. If we did, all of the successes that we are doing here and in the audience is doing would start to have an impact. So your request earlier was, is it possible to build that justice ecosystem starting today? I believe the answer is right here in this auditorium. All of these folks on the panel, all of the expertise that lives in this audience, if we pull together our common humanity, this is a metapartisan problem that transcends election cycles. The answer is right here. All we have to do is do it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, because actually that's what the afternoon is going to be about. We're going to be sitting by region, and New London will be one of them. And, and we'll be looking at how do we build that ecosystem, moderated by Dennis Rands. Thank you. And one of the things also that I didn't mention earlier that we've learned now in this process is, yes, it's difficult to base change on election cycles, because as we're seeing now, things can change very drastically. And it's not to put anybody down or cast aspersions, it's just the reality that people's, like Bill was, when he was chairing the Appropriations Committee, we were getting things done. When he ran for Speaker, and then all of a sudden he was taken off the Appropriations Committee, no one really had their eye on that ball. And so this conversation is about how do we create that collective community of the New Londons, of the New Havens, everybody, all of us working together to ensure that that system works over time. And so that's what we're hoping to do today. So.
Could I jump in real quick? This is Sagacity. Because I'm hearing a lot of talk, and I do believe that it's important for, the word connection keeps coming up, us to stay connected, but I love how Kenyatta had brought up, it's not about the connection, it's not merely about the connection of organizations and institutions and such, right? It's about individual people, right? I still live in the city of Hartford because I think it's important for me to live in the city of Hartford, because everything that goes on or whatever have you, I get to talk to my neighbors, right? As a human being, right? That humanness that connects us. People don't come out to events to come out to, like, I went to the LOB a couple weeks ago because Anderson invited me, right? Anderson's a really nice, cool dude. That's why people come out. So remember that, like, when we do this, it's about reaching out to people as individuals to get them to change that system, right? I'm looking at the audience right now, and in terms of what you were just talking about, who are gonna be the ones that take the charge? How many people in this room right now are under 30, right? Because what we're doing is we have us informed individuals in certain spaces, et cetera, but if we're not going to be laying the foundation, the groundwork for the folks under us to carry that torch and building, a certain level of sustainability, is going to be that much more difficult. So us connecting as people through our organizations, and so it's okay to operate in silos in certain ways, but if I can tap into your email list or whatever listserv you're using to get your information out, like, hey, I have this going on, how can you support me? And we all do that with one another. So I think it's cool that in the afternoon we're going to be connecting that way, but also let's connect as people, because if say if Gus says, hey man, I need you to talk to so-and-so, if somebody who's not as a nice person as Gus asks me to reach out to so-and-so, I'm not going to do it. And we all know that that's true. So let's just look past the organizations and systems, et cetera, but let's remember that it's about the humanness of us. And that's what's going to keep us more connected to the community. So that way it's easier for folks to, because there's certain people who just don't want to talk to people who have been inside, right? We talk about nonviolent offenders a lot, right? Who's talking to the violent offenders, right? So let's talk about if you're not ready to be what people need as an individual, then let's begin to work on that. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Cassidy. And we have, it looks like 5 people lined up, and I just want to be mindful of time. It's 10 of, so maybe we'll go a little rapid fire and try to be brief.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I appreciate the conversation about encouraging the community to collaborate. Has the crime victim community been invited to the table regarding reentry discussions and plans? That's my question.
Well, I'd say on the Sentencing Commission, there's the Office of the Victim Advocate is a part of that. I know as part of the Reentry Collaborative, there's always folks on the table there. And it was part of the reentry strategy that we reached out to a number of victims groups. I don't know if anybody else.
Yes, I talk to anybody who will talk back. And I also just want to comment, thank you, Sagacity, because that was like perfect. The system is working fine, it's just racist.
Jemana? Yes, I would. Next.
I'm sorry, it was me.
Why don't we go,
Yeah.
Germano.
Good morning. My name is Germano Kimbrough, longtime social justice advocate by default. My father was a Black Panther. I came home from Catholic school with my blazer and tie on. In the house where my mother and sister lived was turned into a Black Panther headquarters. I bring up that point to say that I just recently got in touch with the trauma that it affected me. And, you know, going to prison was just a rite of passage for a lot of young Black men like myself that come from inner city environments. And I use that point to preference, you know, we come up with a lot of the solutions, yet we don't address the issues that even led to incarceration. I think a lot of the social issues, and especially the trauma, the untreated trauma, the undiagnosed mental illness, because it's not cool to have a mental illness in the African-American inner city community. And this is someone that's done, you know, undergraduate research on, you know, access to treatment, you know, medical treatment. Even men with health insurance don't necessarily access health services unless it's, you know, at a chronic or acute state. You know, the research that I did based on 200 men said that we access services through the military emergency room and the prisons, and that's unfortunate. You know, and what I've seen is a lot of young men and women enter our systems with untreated, undiagnosed mental health issues, and in particular trauma, and they have a lot of other social issues that never get addressed throughout that process. And so that's the one point I want to put on our radar as we work towards solutions, because we've been talking about this problem a very long time. You know, and again, I agree with the gentleman and what you talk about, the ecosystem. You know, I just want to say that, you know, the thing that came to my mind is we need to smash this system and we need to reinvent the system in the future, right? What does that system look like, you know, in the future? And we need to do that now. We need to create the future now, because the system, you know, is not rocket science to figure out it doesn't work. You know, as a young man, you know, I looked up at the ceiling, you know, of a center cell jail in Wellesley Avenue and knew that there was something very wrong, you know, about this system. You know, the system in itself is criminal. So we need to think about how we need to reinvent it, not reform it. Thank you.
Thank you, Germano. And I know Daryl's going to be leading a breakout on the forensic peer mentoring, and I know we'll probably bring up the trauma issue and the like, so that there'll be more chance for that conversation there, too. Yeah. Sauda.
Good afternoon or good morning, Andrew and panel. I'm with Believe in Me Empowerment Corporation in New Haven, Connecticut. We work with adults and children. And I want to echo what the gentleman said previously, because this is my point as well. We need to begin to look at trauma. And we need to change the conversation. We really need to talk about a public health crisis as opposed to criminal justice. I spent my entire career in criminal justice. And I also was an elected member to the Board of Education in Bridgeport. So I understand the issues that children are impacted by, and also their adults, the families. We need to start looking at some of the things that California is doing in terms of public health crisis. Dr. Nadine Burke, who is now the Surgeon General of California, looking at generational trauma in our children. And I don't know if anybody here on this panel is doing it, but I can tell you it is necessary. We need to begin to address those issues both at our children's level and the adults' level in order to make a difference. We can't go anywhere until we fix that problem. And it isn't just what's going on the surface. We're talking about generations of trauma. We're talking about all the way back to the enslavement of African people on this continent. And we have to fix that, and we can only fix that if we begin to deal with it. We have to deal with it in our schools, we have to deal with it in our social service agencies, we have to deal with it in our hospitals, we have to deal with it in our prisons, we have to deal with it everywhere so we can change how we interact as a community and as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I know how passionate you guys that believe in me are about these issues, and the doctor that spoke earlier, I think it's imperative that they come to the table as well. I know with our racial profiling initiative, the Alvin Penn Act, we have a Dr. Cato Lorenzen that sits on the board, and it provides such a tremendous perspective because he's the head editor of Health Disparity Journal on looking at trauma and the trauma of a traffic stop and how that is informed by the lens at which you look at a traffic stop and the perspective you bring to that. And I think it's so important to inform that conversation. So thank you for bringing that up. We have two more, I think.
I'd like to bring up something I found extremely interesting I've been looking at for close to 40 years, and that is the DOC statistic for inmates coming out of prison smoking within a day is something like 76%. So if you pick up cigarettes, as far as your biochemistry, your brain, your body, how you feel, how you think, all bets are off on feeling good because the cigarettes will suck the life right out of your body. And so we've got recidivism, and we've got relapse prevention, and we've got a whole bundle of issues surrounding biochemistry and addiction. And maybe we should be talking to the system about a stipulation that if you're released early from prison, you're not allowed to pick up cigarettes. It might sound hard to believe, but think of the advantages that we'd have. You know, the nutrition would count a little bit, the exercise would count a little bit, it would encourage, you know, the brain and the body working together as one unit instead of they're always fighting. So if we said cigarettes are definitely off the list if you want to go out, and we're going to check on that. And if we get that done, we're way, way ahead of the curve on what we're going to do with long-term recidivism and preventing crime and preventing and advocating for victims of crime in advance. So we get them healthy, get rid of the cigarettes. It's a big deal. I'd like you to consider it. Thank you.
Thank you. And just quickly with the next two, Cindy, and we'll add the one more.
Hi, my name is Cindy Prizio. A lot of you know me as a member and ED of One Standard of Justice, and the organization fights to restore human dignity and constitutional rights to people on the registry. It doesn't matter what you think or don't think about a sexual offense registry, quite frankly. What I want, I hope you care. And the message is, if we're going to throw people under the bus and scapegoat them, let's make sure we've got some real evidence and not sensationalized attention by the media that perpetuates bad stereotypes and bad data. And what I want to say is about the legislative season. Right now, my group reviewed the bills that we will be supporting and opposing on Monday evening. We've got about 40 on our list. And I am discouraged beyond belief that there are 4 bills, whether they have a chance of going or not, 4 new bills on reinstating the death penalty. We've got 3 or 4 bills on bringing new registries to the state of Connecticut. They don't know what to do with the one they got yet. And so we've got an elder abuse registry, which has now been voted out of committee and is at the Office of Fiscal Analysis. We've got a murderers registry. The only recidivist group lower than a person who does sexual offense is a murderer, 2% or less. Why do we need a registry? And that one they voted to draft language on it. And the third one is with judiciary. I hope it doesn't even get heard, is on implementing a child abuse registry. Registries don't work. The only thing they do, besides punishment, which is being widely recognized throughout the country right now, if not yet here in Connecticut, is they jack up recidivism. They jack up crime. So instead of keeping our communities safer, they have the total opposite effect. And I'm going to leave you with this. About a year ago, I was at, I think, the Bridgeport Roundtable, and I said that if we're not careful, because there's a lot of judgy people out here, that there's going to be a registry, and that they're going to put all felons on a registry. Not simply groups or subgroups, violent offenders or drug offenders, methamphetamine, criminal, white-collar criminal, on and on and on. And so one of the states has proposed placing all felons on a registry. I'm a felon, okay? I'm a youthful offender. But you know what? If 1 out of 3 of us is going to be a felon, who won't be on the registry? And I just want to leave you with that. Registries are bad, and they're sucking us dry for money and probation, community supervision, and on and on and on. And they're doing harm to everyone. Thank you.
Cindy, what state is that?
Sorry, Indiana.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you'll be the last one, and then we're going to head to lunch. Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
And I'm Andre McGuire. I'm really grateful for the fact that you've had an opportunity to pull everybody together here, and there's been a lot of great information that's come forth. But one of the things that stands out in my mind when we talk about including the individuals that are involved in these activities at the tables, for me, that doesn't mean at the table after all the decisions have been made. When the policies are being established, when the groups are getting together, when the reentry roundtables are being set together, there needs to be people who've gone through this system that's going to be at those tables. Those are the individuals who, for the most part, while they were incarcerated, they saw the changes that were being made in them, and they allowed those same individuals to help change other people that were inside. But now that they've come outside, they've largely been ignored. The gentleman was up here talking about you, I believe. He wants to make sure he works with the fathers. That's a group that's just kicked out the window. They want to work with youthful persons, people 26 and below. They don't want to work with people that are between 40 and 50, 40 and 60, which is one of the major groups that we know is very unlikely to recidivate, period. That's the group that has the key to the information about how to keep this stuff from occurring. I sat here and I was listening to, I'm sorry, what's your name down there on the end?
It's Alex Tarkov.
Okay, I was listening when he was talking about the commission. I happened to be at the University of Connecticut's law school when you had a conference there on the registry, and it was a really great conference. They had experts from across the country that came here to that conference. The surprising thing was the experts said that only 900 people, about 900 people, out of all of the people on the registry in this state should be on the registry. But for some reason, we still think we should keep it as a status quo and we should have a registry. If the experts have come from across the country that were brought in by your group and they've attested to the fact that there should only be 900 people on that registry, why are we spending our money on a registry? We should be using that money to actually prevent some of the things that are going on. And there are many programs, I'm sure, that will be able to accomplish that. But it's really a blessing, again, to be able to see you all. And I know a lot of times we'll say, well, you know, when they come out of incarceration, they really don't have the educational background to be able to do many things. I have an associate's degree, I have a bachelor's degree, and I have a Juris Doctorate. I can do probably anything on any of these organizations and do it well. But because I have a conviction I'm not allowed to. And to your statement when you're talking about going before the prosecutor to get approval, amazingly, I had actually filed a motion so that I can have my sentence modified. The judge sent me a letter back that said, I would have granted this, but the prosecutor said no.
Thank you. One of the things that you bring up, I think, is important and how this narrative is framed. And I mean, I've said it before, but this idea of the second chance society has always been put to date on the individual getting a second chance. And I think the way we have to reframe that is our collective society needs a second chance to do this right. And that we need to take as much ownership as we're looking to have individuals take is creating systems and infrastructures to support people and to really do right by the very societies like Sayuda was talking about that have been historically undermined since America began. And the other reframing of the narrative is we constantly have historically in Connecticut and otherwise looked at folks as potential liabilities when they're released instead of assets. And you know, that power of redemption that we've seen in so many voices today and otherwise is palpable. And you know, I've even had these conversations on campus here when we're talking with HR and there's looking at backgrounds and they're worried about this or that. And I'm like, you don't know how strong these people would be as advocates for higher education. How they would motivate these students who maybe are just kind of unsure of what they want to do. That story, that power that they have behind the value of the education is not something to be afraid of. It's something to be welcomed home and supported. So I think we need to reframe that narrative and maybe that's part of the conversation as well.
My problem is a complicated one. It's as a peer support specialist, well, first of all, I work for community mental health affiliates. And as a peer support specialist, I work as a peer support specialist, and my job entails picking up men being released from the prisons. I pick them up at Hartford Correctional Facility. I pick them up from the reentry center. I pick up the women from in front of the Superior Court. Some of these men and women don't have residence to go to. They are homeless. They have to call 211, and 211 has to set up an assessment appointment for them to come in, to be assessed, to be put on a list, what's called a smart sheet, so that they can be able to get into the shelter system. What do they do in the meantime? That they are waiting to get this assessment. I'll tell you what they do. They go down to Park Street and they get some drugs. Why? Because it's much easier to be in limbo than it is to be faced with life's realities. So my question to the panel and to all these wonderful people who are here today that have definitely brought some conversations that matter is this: what are we going to do about it?
Thank you. Frankly, that's a perfect segue into the afternoon.
Hold
so
up, Andrew.
We'll answer that question
Can I just
going
say
in.
one thing before we go?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Fred. Fred, by the way, who we missed tremendously at the last conference, and it's so good to see you back.
Thank you. I just want to talk about when Brother was talking about the violent felons and the Clean Slate Act that's going around and maybe get to Hartford and the bill sooner or later, and the violent offenders. You know, the data and the statistics shows that if a person had committed a violent crime and he's been away for a substantial amount of time, he's not likely to commit that same crime. And so what I'm saying in this Clean Slate bill, because I keep hearing minor crimes, nonviolent felons, and stuff like that. And we're saying for misdemeanors, 3 years, for nonviolent felons, 5 years. You have to, and we keep talking about reentry, and we keep talking about inclusive, but it seems like we're starting to be excluding people. When you're talking about violent offenders, you can't exclude them in the language in which you're going forth with. And even if we have to say that for violent offenders, 10 years, it's not likely that a person who commits a crime, I'm a violent offender, and I'm not a murderer. I committed a crime, but I'm not a murderer. Circumstances was involved in my situation based like the sister was talking about, growing up in Father Panic Village and not understanding certain things. Most of the crimes in Connecticut, period, if there was a grand jury, they're not murderers. Murder was an intent. Most of the crimes in Connecticut are Saturday night specials, where people were just running around. So what I want to say to the panel is somehow we have to come together, like Kenyatta was saying, with community organizations and coming up with somehow lieutenants in communities and have town hall meetings to really get to the bottom of what's going on so we can bring it back to our legislators as a full body, because one person doing something is nothing. But when we got a community, we're a force to reckon with, and we have to come together collectively. That's all I want to say. It's starting right now, building bridges. This is Andrew's fourth one. I appreciate it, but we really have to start coming together. Because every year we come here, we sit here, then we go our separate ways, and like the brother was talking about the silos, I'm really to the point, and I'm passionate about it. I'm not going nowhere. I've been here for the last 12 years, but I hope that we can come together collectively. And on the last thing I want to talk about is that cost of incarceration bill. That's another thing that a lot of people don't know about, that anyone who is convicted of a crime up to 20 years, if you run into an inheritance or if your family leave you some money, that the state can come get it. Now, I was inside the prison, so I know it was a counteract to recoup some of the money that people inside were suing people for. I get that. But 20 years? 20 years? Come on now. If there's something that you want to do for 5 years that you should recoup something, I understand that. But 20 years, you're talking about generations. Anything that I gather, the state could come get it. Let's get serious. If we're talking about reentry and the state is talking about second chance acts, then start acting like it. Because we're not acting like that when we do things like that.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. Yeah, I'd say I'm also tired of it too. So let's make sure it happens so that next year, if we're standing here on stage, we're talking about what we were able to accomplish versus what we need to do. So with that, let's go to lunch. For those who have been here before and those that haven't, it's right across the way down here in the Student Center. There will be handouts for the breakout sessions that have more information on them in the rooms. So take a look at those in front of the alumni. And thank the panelists, please.